Hello, my presentation is going to be about Maria Montessori. So let's begin. I chose to do my project on Maria Montessori because I have witnessed the different kinds of effects that come from her teaching methods. I've seen and heard the name all around town, and even have friends that send their children to Montessori schools, but just was really unaware of what that was. Before I went into education, had really no idea what that was. But working as a substitute teacher, I have worked at a few schools that use the Montessori system, and was very impressed with the results. To give an example, I worked, there's a teacher that I was actually working with kind of closely who worked in a Montessori kindergarten classroom, and I was very impressed with her students' abilities to self-regulate and take responsibility of their own education, make choices, learning choices that were pushing their learning forward and stimulating them. It was very impressive to see, and I know that it doesn't all come from just the program. I'm sure a lot of it had to do with the teacher and that particular set of children, but I was very impressed. So because I had witnessed those kinds of results from the Montessori system, I decided to take a look at Maria Montessori, do a little bit of research about her, and how it all started. So Maria was born August 31st, 1870 in Italy. She actually was raised, her mother was very well educated. Her mother did read a lot of books, and that was very rare for the time. So she did raise Maria as an avid reader as well. And so she did grow up in Rome, around libraries, museums, and fine schools. So she did kind of have that upper class childhood, and that was definitely an influence on her. At age 13, actually, she had enrolled herself in an all-boys technical institute because she had it in her mind that she was going to be an engineer, and so that was her preparation. But she ended up changing her mind and going to medical school instead. She wanted to be a doctor. And when she very first applied for medical school, she was actually rejected. But she stuck with it, ended up graduating from medical school in 1896. And having that medical background kind of caused her to look at education a little bit differently. She approached it from a scientific outlook. That caused her to observe children, experiment with a learning approach, record those results and adjust as needed, and then sort of repeat that process until she found her process of what she felt was working and actually getting results. So she opened her first childcare facility called Casa dei Bambini in 1907, and by 1910, Montessori schools were acclaimed worldwide. She was also an activist for women's rights. She traveled and lectured and wrote and ended up becoming recognized as a feminist. So that was definitely a part of her identity and a big part of, her biography. She died May 6, 1952. So the first Montessori school to open in the United States was in Scarborough, New York, and that was in 1911. So Montessori schools were acclaimed worldwide in 1910, First one here in the US was in 1911. By 1916, there was more than 100 Montessori schools in 22 states. So it took off pretty rapidly. And some of the supporters for her educational approach were Thomas Edison and Alexander Graham Bell. And just as quickly as the Montessori theory or schooling process took off, it kind of died out just as quickly. By the 20s, schools weren't really flourishing in the US anymore, but they still were in other places throughout the world. So a little bit about her philosophy. She, when you read about what she believed and how she approached education, it seems like she mixed a little bit of the realistic philosophy towards education, where students should be involved in something that they can apply to their lives, their realistic lives, something that they can take home with them and practice in the real world. She wanted neighborhood schools to be teaching students skills that they were going to be using in the real world. So that very realistic education comes from your senses, using realia in the classroom, probably taking students outside of the classroom to develop those skills, kind of mixed those ideas with a pretty strong progressive approach. When you look at her lifetime, the things that she went through, and the time period that she was living, the 20th century, just coming out of the war, there was this big belief to center the child of their own education, allow them to be free. And so she definitely had a strong influence from that progressive philosophy, allowing children to discover their own learning in their own ways, and really sticking to that. So that's a good summary of her philosophy, aligned with that scientific approach that she took to learning about how children were learning. So another big part of her philosophy and what she felt was necessary inside of a classroom that would produce results was differentiation. Every child is different. Every child has their own unique value, which again backs up that progressive philosophy. This helped her design classrooms, routines that were used inside of her classrooms, and this approach also helped her come up with these self-regulation methods for students, that they would be in charge of their own bodies, their own emotions. Those social skills were very important to develop along with the academic side of things. So the classroom, became this small community where students, everybody had their own role and they were all a part of the community. And so when everybody participated correctly in these small communities, it was like a miniature world of what they would experience as adults. In those communities, the students had this freedom to choose what they would learn, to make choices about their own education, of course, within limits. So a big lesson with Montessori schools is a student will receive a lesson on how to participate correctly in a specific academic activity. And, once they've had that lesson, then that can be an activity that they choose to do again. As long as it's something that will push forward their learning, then they can choose, I want to do this one, or I've already had a lesson on this other activity, I'm going to choose that one. But once they learn something, they make these choices to, I'm going to choose to continue this learning. And so student choice is a big component of both Montessori as well as progressivism. This is a quote that I felt all teachers can relate to, and said by Maria Montessori: "The greatest success from a teacher is to be able to say the children are now working as if I did not exist." And so this was really the goal of Maria Montessori. And it really is the goal of most teachers as well. In today's society, we want to build independent thinkers, independent learners, and so really that is the end goal. These are the references that I used for my presentation. The last thing that I guess I meant to mention was that Maria, she was stuck in the wrong place at the wrong time. At one point in her life, she would travel to India in 1940, got caught in a war, and ended up being stuck in India, living in exile. So she took advantage of the time, began teaching her methods to others in India, the teachers there. But the thing that I wanted to add in was that because of this experience, she ended up weaving peace as a big part of her education philosophy. And so the experience that I have had when I've witnessed Montessori schools is a very peaceful one. Students tend to be calm, making their own choices, moving about the classroom autonomously, and having that very peaceful environment. She was definitely able to speak to peace and apply that into her education approach because of the experiences that she had. And that is the end of my presentation.